Welcome to Module 2. We're going to discuss how semiotics relates to mass communication and ultimately our whole world. Before we get started, let's talk about the Module 1 test. If you have any questions or concerns, please email or text me. I'll be continuing the open office hours on Wednesdays at 2:15 p.m. on Zoom. And here is that link to that. I also have this in Canvas, so if you can't find it, just text me and I will send you the invitation so you can come. I'll be there for 30 minutes, and if no one comes, then I'll go ahead and close it off. But if you were to have an issue and you want to talk to me about it, we'll talk as long as we need to. The 30 minutes is simply arbitrary at this point. If that doesn't work with your schedule, I would be happy to have a separate meeting whenever it's convenient for your schedule. So just let me know. I'm always available. Now on to the lecture. We're gonna explore four movements that have played a large role in advertising, visual advertising, since it began. This is certainly not an exhaustive list, but it's important anyway. The movements that I want to discuss are Marxism. I'm sure that you've heard a lot about Marxism from the news and the talking heads. Freudism, it's hard for me to say, which is a contributing factor to many of the ideas of the modern world. And then we have existentialism and semiotics. So let's start off with Marxism. Karl Marx was a German philosopher. He was also a political theorist, and he was also an economist, journalist, and revolutionary socialist in the 19th century. His works inspired the foundation of communist regimes in the 20th century. I won't go into the details of his philosophy. However, Marx had a great deal to say about capitalism and how it creates artificial needs and consumerism to boost profits. His influence, however, was a negative view of advertising, and it's been felt as the nemesis of progress, and the nods to the imagery of Marxism have been popular in commercials. So let's go here. I'm going to play a video for you, an ad that it is a very good example of how Marxism was used as the enemy in a commercial. Probably one of my favorite commercials. I have a tendency to do that, pick my favorite commercials. I don't want to show you something that I think is lousy, so unless that's the intent. But anyway, this was done in 1984, which is ironically the name of a popular book by George Orwell about communism. Apple introduced the Macintosh computer that radically changed the script for personal computers and ultimately shaped the technology revolution, in my opinion. So let's take a look.
Today we celebrate the first glorious anniversary of the information purification activities. In all history, a garden of pure ideology, where each worker may bloom, secure from the pests of very contradictory thoughts. Creation of laws is more powerful a weapon than any fleet or army on earth. We are one people, with one will, one resolve, one cause. Our enemies shall talk themselves to death, and we are ready with their own terms. We shall prevail.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
This is my take on the meaning of the ad. A single brave person dares to challenge the communist state of PCs by hurling a hammer into the Big Brother screen, shattering the image and ignorance forever. That's my read of the video. Please consider my worldview of technology through the lens of Apple. My first computer was a PC, a Commodore 128. In my opinion, it was nothing but a boat anchor. It absolutely was useless. The first real computer I bought was a Power Macintosh 7200, and from that point on, I became an Apple believer. So perhaps your view is different because you may have been using Windows for a very long time. So your lens would be through the Windows view. Maybe your granddad worked for Dell. Maybe your take would be completely different from mine. And that is okay. That is semiotics at work. Our individual understanding and meaning making from the interpretation of visual cues should not be identical. It would not be the same for everybody. That is the beauty and the pitfall of semiotics. Let's move on to Freudism. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, was a physiologist, medical doctor, psychologist, and influential thinker of the early 20th century. I'm sure you're familiar with his work, and I know that you're familiar with his name. Freud's reputation and fame grew enormously, and he continued to write prolifically until his death, producing in all more than 20 volumes of theoretical works and clinical studies. He also was not adverse to critically revising his views or to make fundamental alterations to his most basic principles when he considered that the science evidence demanded it. This was most clear in his advancement of a completely new tripartite. I can't really pronounce that right. Basically, it's the id, the ego, and the superego model of his mind in his 1923 work, The Ego and the Id. So Freud's work was the foundation of strategic advertising. When companies wanted to gauge the probability of success for a new product, they would enlist marketer researchers to uncover, or you can also say psychoanalyze, the hidden motivations of a select group of consumers to determine what might trigger their buying habits. Marketers understood that consumers' purchasing decisions are influenced by these three psychological components. By crafting advertisements that appeal to specific aspects of the ego, the id, or superego, they can tap into consumers' unconscious desires and motivations to create a stronger emotional connection and encourage purchasing. So the next one is existentialism. I know all of you've heard about this one, but there's really no universally agreed upon definition. Existentials were a group of European philosophers, primarily from the 19th and the 20th century, who emphasized that individuals must create their own meaning and essence of life, because existence precedes essence, and there is no predetermined purpose for humanity. Key figures of this particular movement were, and I am going to really mess up these names, Kierkegaard, who is considered the founder, along with Nietzsche, Heidegger, and Jean-Paul Sartre, Beauvoir, and Camus. I'm sorry, I put a P in that. Camus, not campus, but Camus. These thinkers focus on themes of individual freedom, responsibility, authenticity. I know we've all heard that word like all the time. And the search for meaning in an absurd world. Okay, they sounded like they were pretty much downers. But you've got to consider what was happening in Europe in their lifetimes. They were around in the 19th and the 20th centuries. The early 20th century was basically the beginning of World War I. So things were happening in their lifetimes that were really very scary and sad and very confusing. And then right on the heels of World War I, there was the World Depression, the Great Depression. It hit not only the United States, but the entire world. Everybody was affected by it. World War II, the rise of Nazism, the Holocaust. I mean, we're talking dark times. So no wonder they were kind of depressed, because that's the way I look at it, is that if you feel like you have no purpose in life, there's a certain amount of melancholy that goes with that. So we're going through those kind of times ourselves. There are some really confusing things that have happened and are continuing to happen. We have had endless wars that nobody really understands why they continue. Some of those are getting cleared up, but it's a hard, long road. Then we had COVID-19. Oh my goodness, that just like broke everything. I know that most of you were probably in high school when this was happening, and that it just totally shook you to your foundation. I know it shook me to mine. And so we're all searching for meaning. So this has become a really important topic. So the core existential themes are authenticity, freedom of choice, personal responsibility, and the search for meaning in an indifferent universe. The universe, in the ideology of existentialism, the universe doesn't give a flip about us. And this has become the foundation of modern marketing in its most successful campaigns. Today's consumer doesn't just buy products, they invest in narratives that help define their existence. Research from the Harvard Business Review shows that 64% of consumers cite shared values as the primary reason they have a relationship with the brand. I have this too. I just told you about my feelings about Apple. I mean, that's part of my persona, is I am an Apple user. So we all do that. This represents a fundamental shift from transitional to meaning-based consumption. And finally, we have semiotics, the thing that we're all here for. As we've discussed, semiotics deals with the sensory component of advertising. We've covered the basics of this theory, so let's get to how it's used in advertising. Basically, it's used to tell a story with images that have meaning to the audience, colors that culturally dovetail with the story, and with commercials, sound comes into play by setting the scene. Semiotics ties closely into culture and what's trendy at the time. It can also have a big impact on brand development, on how a company implements semiotics. From the more straightforward and clean use of photography to the vague and thought-provoking use of imagery, and usually minimal text, all of these categories are used separately as well as in collaboration to make something interesting. And it should be considered when thinking about the message that you're trying to communicate. The key takeaway to consider is your audience, what they value, how you translate those values into a visual that's relevant. Using these categories is a great starting point for understanding how to communicate to different audiences. Modern advertising is interpreted as an artifact of mass culture. It's a cultural product of the postmodern aesthetics. Here are examples of successful brands that use semiotics. Starbucks is number one. The green mermaid logo is often associated with environmentalism, sustainability, and being exotic. This message resonates with Starbucks' target audience of coffee lovers who value quality, responsibility to the environment, and a sense of adventure. The Nike swoosh logo. This brand has created a culture of athletes and those who want to be seen as athletic through their products and branding. Consumers now have the connection between the Nike logo of being part of the fit culture, ultimately creating brand loyalty over many industry competitors. One of the problems with semiotics is if the message is complex and fast-moving, is to make sense of it. To use semiotics successfully, you must be aware of the consumers, their worldview, their shared experiences, their culture, and be aware enough to make the necessary shifts that may not align with your own personal views. This is something that every client should be taught at the very beginning. Sometimes the advertising that they're wanting you to do will not align with their own views because they may be targeting a teenage audience, but they're 65 years old. They're not going to be seeing the same things the same way. One of the tools used by advertisers is analysis of semiotic messages. In Module 3, we're going to experiment with analyzing. Remember, one of the problems is if the images are complex and fast-moving, it's really hard to make sense of anything. We've talked about images that we all store in our brains from birth. These are the most accessible images and convey the most emotion. So let's move on to print ads. We're going to start with old media. So you know how I love history. Let's look at the progression of the old media legacy, they call it, but it's really just the old media. One of the oldest examples of print advertising was a notice to help a weaver in Egypt find his runaway slave. This is a fragment of that advertising from 3000 BC in Thebes. Hopefully that ad wasn't very successful. The only symbolism in this is just some writing. They didn't use any pictures. They didn't use any semiotics as we're talking about with, graphic images, except for the alphabet. Very straightforward. Magazines were considered the periodical of amusement. So they had things that were more commonly interesting to the masses. And so this was the first magazine that showed up in France in 1672. It was founded by a writer named, and his name is probably on here somewhere in really small type. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. The last name is Vize. It has a little mark above the E, so I really would screw that up if I were to say it. But basically this magazine contained court news, anecdotes, and short pieces of verse. I'm thinking poetry. This was followed up in 1688 by a German periodical that entertaining and serious, rational, and unsophisticated ideas on all kinds of agreeable and useful books and subjects. What a title. This was issued by Christian Thomasus, who made a point of encouraging women readers. I guess that's why it needed to be entertaining and agreeable. England was next in the field of magazines, with a penny weekly called the Athenian Gazette, run by London publisher John Dutton. Soon after that, the Gentleman's Journal, started by French-born Peter Anthony Meadow, with a monthly blend of news, prose, and poetry. They loved their poetry back then, apparently. In 1693, Dutton brought out the first magazine specifically for women, the Ladies' Mercury. The London Spy was issued by tavern keeper Ned Ward in 1698, containing a running narrative of the sights and sounds of London. It sounds like the London Spy, that sounds like something about murder and mystery and stuff like that. Sounds interesting. In the U.S., magazines started being published in 1741. In that year, Andrew Bradford's American Magazine, the first publication of its kind in the colonies, was started. It was joined by just 3 days later by Benjamin Franklin's General Magazine. Neither of them lasted very long, but Franklin was widely known for another of his publications, the Poor Richard's Almanac. That one went from 1732 to 1757, which contained maxioms and proverbs. Before the end of the 18th century, more than 100 magazines had appeared, offering miscellaneous entertainment, uplift, or information, and I'm sure a few poems too. Among the most important were in Philadelphia, the Pennsylvania Magazine, edited by Thomas Paine. I know that's a person's name that you've heard before. The American Museum by Matthew Carey. The Massachusetts Magazine, published in Boston, and the New York City Magazine in 1790. By the 1830s, printing became less expensive here in the United States, and magazine readership expanded to the general public. More entertainment magazines were published, and by 1842, illustrations were widely used in tandem with the written word. So now we're getting into some graphic images, finally. The Illustrated London News was the first publication to include woodcut designs, which I don't know if I have any artists in the audience, but woodcutting is quite the art and can be very, very beautiful. It's really difficult too. I've tried doing it, and it is difficult. And later, the first two to include Photographs. Oh my goodness, we're getting into photographs now. About 40 years later, the National Geographic was founded, and to this day, it's known for its beautiful natural photography and the scientific content. By the mid-20th century, publications started focusing more on specific niches. Women's magazines offered practical homemaking tips, and men's magazines discussed news and culture. By the 1920s, some modern staples were created, such as Reader's Digest, Better Homes and Gardens, and Time magazine. And in 1944, Seventeen was the first magazine to appeal specifically to the teenage market. By the 1940s and 50s, color images dominated, and they were becoming the normal thing. With television's popularity, print advertising needed to up their game and use more visuals to effectively hold people's attention. So I want to look at two print ads from the 1980s. Now, the first one is what I call the avocado ad. The copy has the words like sensuous, and the colors look really appealing. I mean, that really is a pretty nice color photo of that. And that was before Photoshop, I might add. Whenever I was putting this lecture together, I was also in the process of making an HEB list to go and pick up groceries. And I saw this ad, and it made me so want an avocado that ended up on my list, and I had no intention. So ads do make us make decisions. So I guess that's a good thing, though, because I do love guac. The next ad is a chocolate ad. And in a word, this advertisement is decadent. Godiva uses the negative space to fixate the reader on that chocolate, as if we needed any help. No, I didn't add this to my HEB list. I resisted. But this was a very specific ad that Godiva did. This wouldn't work necessarily in a ladies' home journal, and it definitely wouldn't work in a 17 magazine, because that is a golf ball sitting on a tee, but the golf ball is made of chocolate, Godiva chocolate. Oh my gosh. So this was probably made for a golfing magazine. I'm not really certain what publications it showed up in, but it is a very effective ad. The reasons that people advertise have really not changed so much over all of the eons that we've been having print ads and that sort of thing. The needs of the people are pretty much the same. Like, for instance, in that runaway slave ad, they wanted to have a call to action. They wanted people to help them. They needed help. So that was a call to action. That's probably the first thing that people think of whenever they're making an ad. They have a reason to contact people. But there's also the need to let people know about their sales and their reduced prices. They also want to announce brand new products, or maybe some that have been reinvented. And also, sometimes in this day and age, what kind of really great payment plans they have, like cars. Cars are sold on the interest rate that you can get. If you have a 0% interest, you're going to draw a certain crowd like crazy. There's also things that we advertise for, content offers in catalogs and that sort of thing. There's contests and giveaways, warranties. How long are we going to have a warranty on this car or whatever? And then there's just the plain old emotion-driven and outcome-focused benefits as well. We're going to stop there for now. I'm trying to keep the videos a little bit on the shorter side. Next up, we're going to talk about electronic media and all those things that encompasses. If you have any questions, please give me a text.